Take a look at that curve. Keep it in your head. How are we doing? 2016. One audacious goal. You've heard about the audacious goal for 2016. And this is really a review slide. The focus in 2014 to 2015 was continued tweaking and refining of programs. In the summer of 2010, when I came here, you could have fired a cannon on Wednesday night, even in the fall, and not hit a soul. Look what you've done to programs. They're more stable. Are they tough? Yes, we're stretching it a bit, but we've got that set up. We structure for growth. That's the management. Not structuring for shrinking, but structuring for growth. Remember we talked about size a year or so ago, that we have the wrong system sizes in some places. We'll talk about that later. Our focus for last year was those relational processes for the congregation as a whole. That's when we started congregational conversations, the quarterly conversations, and the congregation actually had input that we did follow up on. And we brought it down to 3 top priorities and said, which one? Well, what we were doing was not picking a priority, so now you know. That was important. What we were doing is developing relational processes that connect the congregation. You see how that was done? We don't know if that's the right answer, but it certainly is better than it was. And I know that because I tested it my first year here. The council made a decision, and I promised myself I wouldn't tell anybody about it. Okay? And nobody else but the council knew about it. That's a disconnect. And now we're getting those communication, those relational pieces put back in so the congregation can be engaged together. And then for the audacious goal, that was a collaborative relational risk that we took when we contacted the families that we did. We learned together. We've learned some things out of that. And as a development engineer, what we used to call that is ready, fire, aim. You get as ready as you can, you fire, and then you tweak. And then you get ready again, and you fire, and you tweak. That's how you develop systems. Carl ought to know that. He works on systems, so he can tell you that. Okay, so what was our audacious goal? It was a follow-up ministry. I'll just remind you that we were going to reach out in a personal way to those who had been recently disconnected or disengaged. Okay? We had 200 households, and then we pared them down to about 120 based on knowing where some folks were and that they absolutely weren't capable of coming. We contacted or attempted to contact about 70 households and were successful in 48 of them. And we found that 5 of those 48 were already attending, but they weren't signing in. You all sign in today? Sign in, you might get a call. You never know. 6 of the 48 were attending elsewhere, but of those 6, 2 had moved, and 2 were attending their retirement or nursing facility services. So that's not too bad. Here's what we got out of that, very briefly. And if you want more details, you can contact Nathan or Pat Thornton, Nathan Schurseth or Pat Thornton. The number 1 category of folks were no ongoing church connections. That's almost half of the remaining. Their kids were done with confirmation, or their kids graduated, or the adults just simply disconnected. And they were either, that was 9, that was almost 20%. 7 were too busy. 4 of the 7 were busy with kids, 2 were busy with work, and 1 was just busy. And then there were a couple who had a major life event like a divorce or the death of a spouse, and they were grieving, and they just disconnected. The second category was only 20%, so it's about half as large as the first, and that had to do with age and health. And all 10 of those responses were happy with Asbury. They just had some physical issues in their lives that they couldn't be as active as they once were. They couldn't be at church, they couldn't sit through the hour, they couldn't get to church, and so 2 of those 10 are attending at their healthcare facility. Now, a smaller group then, again about half, said, oh, yeah, I'd like to become active again when they got contacted. I actually have seen a couple of people come back, but if we don't connect with them based on number 1, they'll go away again. So when you see somebody that you haven't seen in a while, welcome them and help them connect. Now these actually become opportunities to enhance our ministries, and here's what the team concluded from that. We need to connect parents in other ways than just doing children's programming. Because once the children get through and graduate one way or another, either from confirmation or from high school, parents are gone. Because they didn't connect and get themselves going on their own spiritual journey. Significant life events are a reason for change, but that's a reason for us to engage, not give them space. I'm not saying crowd them and bug them, but I'm saying connect, check in. How are you doing? What can I do for you? And keep following up. That's that follow-up ministry. How can we reach those who physically can't come? And how many adults cannot or are not connected with a small group? How many of them might even be interested? Those are all questions that we need to be asking as we continue in our ministries and tweak those ministries and programs with the relational processes that connect them into a discipleship pathway. Okay? Now I'm going to share with you some interesting statistics. Linda Manning found these for me. Church members who have become involved in some type of group are 5 times more likely to be active in the church 5 years later than those who only come to worship. That's a big number. About 83% of those in this study who joined and were involved in a small group were still active 5 years later. Only about 16% of those who were only attended worship were active 5 years later. That's a significant statistic. That's important to note. Now, years ago, people would come into the church and they'd engage with worship first, and then they might get involved in something else. That is not true anymore. Worship is not the main venue for connection. It is small groups and ministries. They'll connect with those small groups and ministries, and then they'll come to worship. That's the more of a norm, okay? And that's why those Wednesday night midweek programs for all ages are very, very important. That's why our ministries that work with people eyeball to eyeball outside of these walls are very, very important, because that's where the connections get made first. And then possibly to worship, okay? I'm watching your brains. Your eyes are starting to roll. Are you getting overloaded? All right, here we go. One of the things council did just this past week was took a look at the church-wide priorities. And we tweaked them just a little bit so that as different ministries and councils and commissions wrote their goals for 2017, they need to line up somewhere with these priorities. The very first one has 3 of the major principles in it: relational, program, and management. So listen for this. Every member a disciple. Okay? Nothing wrong with that. That's a really good priority. Okay, but look at item D. The first 3 we left alone, but item D we shifted. This church had been concerned with children's and youth ministry and said we need a sustainable children's and youth ministry. That is not what the statistics tell us, and it is not what our own follow-up tells us. Now, I'm not saying we should not do children and youth programming. Yes, we should, but look at the way this is worded. To develop sustainable, relational family ministries for and with families and individuals. So in other words, when we have children and children's programming, we're not just programming for children. We need to make sure the adults connect in a way. And maybe an entry point is to get involved with that children's programming, because that's what Boy Scouts do, that's what all of the different 4-H's do, but then to connect them. And don't just leave them hanging there. Relational family ministries. You hear that R, the processes. It's a direct response, and it's going to be a ready, fire, aim. All right? It's a ready, fire, aim. The second priority, focus on growth. What side of the line is that? Left side. What's the dominant principle? Vision. So we need to look at vision. Focusing on spiritual depth, church membership, where that's numbers, new ministry opportunities, and sustainable funding for growth. This combines the 2 previous priorities. We had 3 of them. This combines the 2. So we're down to 2. Every member a disciple. Grow. Focus on growth. All right? We've been working on the R, the P, and the M, right? Now we got to get that V. And we're going to prioritize, we're going to finalize these priorities at Charge Conference on November 13th, and I'll tell you more about that. Before I completely overload you, do you have any questions, comments, or insights?
Doesn't this kind of follow the population of the state of Iowa over the last 60 years?
Well, yes. The question is, does this kind of follow the state population over the last several years? Yes, except for the Quad City area. We are a declining church in a growing area. That doesn't make sense, okay? We're not even capturing enough to keep us up with the population growth. But yes, we have declined for other reasons all over the state. Yep.
Growing area, and like much of the state of Iowa, much of 6 out of 10 folks in the Quad City, Bettendorf, and LeClaire don't have a church affiliation.
Yep. I'll read 6 out of 10, 60% don't have a church affiliation of any kind. They might be visiting, they might be a consumer hopping around, but they don't really have an affiliation. Right. Yep, Don?
And I find myself thinking the word balance in this, and that is what gets out of balance. And sometimes you even think physically of a scale, and none of us use these scales anymore, but the two sides, and where are we? And it's not that one is totally bad, one is totally
right.
It's not that we have no vision. Well, of course we've got vision. But
it's just focused wrong.
Where's the balance?
Where's the balance? Yep.
Your comment about worship versus small group ministries. I've always had the mindset that worship is the focus. From worship, people then get motivated to organize and do ministry and get involved. So worship is the focus. Well, what you said today is that it's showing that that's not the balance anymore. Yes, worship is important.
Yes, worship is important, but if you build it, they won't come.
Yeah.
They won't. 60% are unaffiliated. Why would they come?
And from what we've been reading, even more of the younger generation, 30-year-olds, are going to get involved with a ministry first before they choose to be involved in worship.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk a lot about millennials because we just don't have time. That's the 30 to 40-year-olds. 25 to 35 actually is technically it. But they are a wonderful group of young people who have some wonderful qualities, but it's different than us. And so we're going to if we're serious about going after young folk, we're going to have to figure out what makes them tick and how we can share the gospel with confidence, faithfully, and yet connect with them. Okay? That's that outreach. Okay? So where do we go from here? 2017, when we told you, leadership told you, is we're going to do the second piece, which is the practice of ministry. And I'm suggesting that whatever practice of ministry goal we put into place needs to have all 4 of those principles dominant. Vision, relationship, programs, and management. All 4 need to be dominant if we're going to make our way back to interrupt the life cycle and get back on the growing side of the curve. Okay? Anybody need to read any more on that? All right. What we did is we put together a ministry assessment team, and that was done by prayer. I think Steve was out of town, but Nathan and Pat and I came up with, no, it was Nathan and Rick, prayed and came up with a list of names, and the names that were found on all 3 of those lists ended up on this ministry assessment team. It doesn't mean that any of you are better or worse. It just means that that's how we discerned. And we invited Reverend Dr. Jay Johnson, who, FOM stands for Field Outreach Minister. They're employees of the conference. Jay is also a field outreach minister, but his specialty is process and growth. Okay, so that's why we